And welcome to the WHO Collaborating Centre Network Strategy Workshop for 2021. And we're more than delighted to have you all here this afternoon. Julian Gold is my name. I co-chair the executive of the network with Susan Sawyer. And between Susan and I and Selina Lo and Sandro Demaio, we hope to provide you with an entertaining, interesting and productive afternoon. Before I start, I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Gadigal people, which is where I sit on their land in Sydney. They're the traditional custodians of the land, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So thank you very much, and we can now open the meeting. Now, what I would like to do in the beginning is just to tell you what we're going to do this afternoon. And first, I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Selina Lo, who's just been appointed or recently appointed as the Executive Director of the Global Health Alliance. And Selina will take an instrumental part in the proceedings this afternoon. And then we're delighted to have Dr. Sandro Demaio. Sorry, I've mispronounced that, so I apologise in the beginning. He's the Director, CEO of VicHealth, and will be introduced by Selina. And then Susan Sawyer will introduce our strategy, and we'll then take some questions on that and have a discussion as to the current and somewhat future direction of the WHO Collaborating Centre Network, of which all of you are members. So what I would like to do now is to introduce Dr. Selina Lo. As I said, she's recently been appointed as the Executive Director of the Global Health Alliance. And although she sent me a brief CV, it's just a litany of impressive achievements. Selina is a consulting editor of The Lancet and previously senior editor based in Beijing and London, responsible for global and even planetary health commissions. I like that. She's got a medical degree from University of Melbourne and also trained in tropical medicine and law. And she previously worked for Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières as we've come to know it, and the Clinton Foundation in Afghanistan, Myanmar, China, Bangladesh, and also in Geneva on access to medicines. And she's consulted or been a senior research fellow for WHO, the Victorian Department of Health, Monash University, and the United Nations University in Malaysia, amongst other institutions. And what more can I say? Welcome, Selina, and we're more than delighted to have you as a partner through the Global Health Alliance with the WHO Collaborating Centre Network. So with that, I'll just hand over to Selina.
Thank you so much, Julian, for your generous and kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to initiate this workshop meeting today. So I also wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land upon which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Where I sit in Melbourne, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also wish to acknowledge First Nations peoples everywhere and their connection to country, planet and to health of all species. So the Australian Global Health Alliance is a national membership of diverse institutions and organisations. Many of you are part of this membership, and we share and promote global health values, partnerships and sustainable investment for global health challenges. We're committed to health equity that includes intergenerational equity, health security, inclusion, diversity and partnerships. our tiny secretariat, all of us are actually here on this Zoom meeting today. Among many functions, also many of which are advocacy and information sharing, we also host the Secretariat of Pacific Friends of Global Health, the WHO Collaborating Centre Network, and a partnership on malaria. So this is, for me, I'm very new and I'm really happy to be here with you. But it's an exciting and necessary time to advance the Australian WHO Collaborating Centre Network strategy and vision. At no time in modern global health history, I would say, apart from perhaps to an extent the AIDS epidemic, has the leadership of multilateral institutions in particular been so tested. And in particular, WHO and its custodianship of technical excellence, it's so critically urgent at this moment. So in Australia, to learn that we have 54 collaborating centres was such a surprise for me, but it also confirmed my own bias as a Lancet Global Health editor, that Australia has indeed more excellent global health leaders and institutions per capita than most OECD nations. And if any of you have a private exchange with me, I'm happy to share some of my anecdotes there. I'm here in my capacity as the new Executive Director of the Alliance to listen and to share thoughts today. And I've been really looking forward to this meeting, particularly after the enthusiastic and expert onboarding from Susan, Julian and Piali, who I'm so grateful are leading this journey with you. So it is with great pleasure I introduce a leader in the global health world and a long-term colleague and friend. Dr. Sandro Demaio is a medical doctor and currently CEO of VicHealth, the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation. VicHealth hosts the WHO Collaborating Centre for Leadership in Health Promotion. He was previously the medical officer for non-communicable conditions and nutrition with the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development at the World Health Organization. He was also the CEO of the EAT Foundation, which is the science-based global platform for food systems transformation based in Oslo. He's published more than hundreds of articles and scientific papers and is the author of several books based on science and inspired by love of food because he loves food. And he also co-hosts an ABC TV show called Ask the Doctor, which some of you may have seen. He's a long-term friend of the Lancet Medical Journal and has worked with us on nutrition, the EAT Lancet Planetary Health Commission, and currently also the Commercial Determinants of Health series. He originally trained and worked at the Alfred here in Melbourne. He holds degrees in public health, PhD in non-communicable diseases, and has had fellowships at Harvard and also Johns Hopkins. But Sandro is so much more than his bio, which is more impressive than mine. Sandro understands branding and platforms, particularly in global health, and he understands how to build strong communities and the importance of advocating in global health to transfer our relative privilege when the opportunity arises. These are not themes that we learn at med school or in public health school, and it is for this reason we felt he was one of the best people to address you today in your challenge. And we're privileged, and I'm very grateful that he's taken his time from his very busy schedule to be with us today. Thank you so much, Sandro, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Selina. I am humbled by the introduction. I'd just like to start also by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on here in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge any First Nations leaders, researchers joining us today online around Australia. And I'd also just like to echo what Selina said, that as the oldest continuous culture in the world, and as I stand on land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land, we need to respect the fact that in many ways, I believe, and many of us believe, that the original genesis of planetary health was in fact with our Indigenous Australians. It's a real pleasure to be here. I always laugh when I get the introduction, and particularly at the length of, God, the UN, they love the long titles, don't they? I'm sorry about that. But it's a real pleasure to be able to join you for a quick conversation about some of the reflections, I suppose, of my 18 months as a CEO of VicHealth, but also, you know, where we stand as a global health community, the responsibility that's in our hands and the opportunity that comes with that, but as well the enormous challenges, and how we as, I suppose, leaders, and particularly acknowledging that I'm still learning. I'm relatively early in my career and don't have all the answers, but you know, I'm very happy to contribute some of our learnings and also talk about maybe some of our you know, important formative failings that continue to inform and iterate how we approach and respond to the major global challenges facing ourselves and our planet. So I wanted to put the little, you know, quotation marks around recovery, because I think, you know, we're still working out what recovery is, and some days, particularly this week, as we look around the world and even closer to home, recovery is a bumpy ride. And so I just wanted to acknowledge, you know, there's a level of hubris in talking about recovery or pretending that we know where we're heading. So, you know, we've talked we've had multiple discussions before, but I think as we talk, you know, as we think about this, where we stand at the moment, 9 years from 2030, on a planet that is further than we were yesterday from achieving our SDGs, our collective targets, our existential ambitions, and the important commitments that we've all made as a planet, not just to ourselves, to those that we share this planet with, and of course the planet itself and future generations. It is important to take stock of the time we find ourselves in, not just as researchers and as leaders, but also particularly, I think, in the public health space. We often talk about, you know, a systems-based approach or a system or systems disruption. Well, you know, I think while it may have seemed like some sort of esoteric theoretical concept 18 months ago, in many ways we've seen the kind of quintessential systems disruption. Every aspect of our lives, the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, whatever you want to call it, this virus has clearly turned every aspect of our being, of the way we work, where we work, how we travel, how we interact, how we access and even think about health, what health is, what healthcare is, what the role of the health system is, what the role of doctors are. You know, everything has been disrupted to its core, and with that comes enormous challenges, but also opportunities. I often talk with my team about, you know, the world is a snow globe and we've been shaken violently, and now where that snow settles over the next 18 months is both the biggest opportunity and the biggest threat or challenge, I think, facing us as current generation of leaders, and a once-in-a-generation opportunity. You know, being much more tangible, I suppose, we as an agency have undertaken a number of pulse surveys across our state of 6.5 million Victorians. So we're the state's peak prevention agency. We're not the Department of Health. We're an independent statutory authority. We're established in the late 80s through a hypothecated tax on tobacco to buy out advertising of tobacco in sports, arts and cultural events. And over time, those budgets became dauntingly large. Our budgets were fixed. The budgets of advertising, that is, became dauntingly large. Ours became fixed, and so we have evolved to be the peak health promotion agency. And through a number of what we, you know, during the 90s, whilst many around the world replicated our model, we now have become one of the unique agencies of our kind, independent and yet government funded around the world. We undertake quite a range of research, and we see in our population-based research that, again, this systems disruption has affected different people in different ways. There is no single experience, lived experience of the pandemic. We've seen people turning to highly processed foods in record numbers to make ends meet. We've seen a doubling of food insecurity. We've seen record proportions of psychological stress. We've seen young people falling out of you know, eroding away of the long-standing gains we've made in females, particularly women and girls' participation in community sport. Again, every aspect of our lives has been disrupted. Every determinant of health has been affected. But I think, you know, what's really become clear for us over the last 18 months, and this is, you know, probably the biggest opportunity for all of us, is that what we call the social determinants, but really the wider social, economic, political, commercial, cultural determinants of health. The fact that we know that it's not someone's laziness or stupidity that results in their ill health, it's the structural, social, commercial drivers and barriers that stand in their way to achieving good health. That has gone from being, you know, politically unpalatable to being completely politically unavoidable. That discussion, that reality, whether you're conservative or progressive, is very much something that we can no longer ignore, because these cracks of inequity that we have thinly papered over for decades, you know, have been exposed for what they are: deep, intractable, and really highly dangerous when you add a virus. But of course, on the long-standing and long-existing pandemic of slow motion, the pandemic of chronic disease, we knew, you know, very much the same things were playing out, just in slow motion, and for diseases that were more easily ignored. So we've garnered, you know, lots of insights, I think, over the last 18 months, and I just wanted to sort of, you know, present some of our thinking. So, you know, if I think, what have I learned that we're trying to integrate into our business of health promotion and public health? First of all was, you know, we realised that we needed to be a better partner to communities, that a top-down, single sort of approach from an ivory tower never worked and doesn't work. And that involves putting our egos aside as a public health community, and particularly doctors like myself. But it also means really understanding and questioning, well, what does it mean to be an expert? What is an expert? What is the role of lived experience? How do we really value local community-based innovation and interventions? How do we listen properly to community leaders, value their insights, give them resources, support, and often just get out of the way and let them do what they're doing well? And that has been a key lesson. I think that disseminated place-based approach has certainly been a lesson of the pandemic response here in Victoria, whether it's chronic disease or whether it's indeed the pandemic itself. I think really thinking carefully about what is it that we are talking about when we're talking about inequity. You know, when we talk about inequity, all too often we talk about populations, but it's not about, you know, while we can't forget that there are populations who face significant barriers to achieving and maintaining good health, unacceptable barriers in a country so wealthy and so developed. It's not some inherent weakness in that individual or that community. Actually, those communities hold incredible levels of power and insight and knowledge. It's actually the structural barriers and the role of power and privilege in society that is continuing to perpetuate those inequities. And so really understanding and examining those, our own roles, you know, as VicHealth is an agency that does represent power and privilege in society. How do we unpack that? How do we understand that so that we can be a constructive partner and a respectful partner in addressing the barriers that people face, that different groups face in achieving and maintaining good health? That requires obviously self-reflection, you know, more authentic engagement, and so we have spent a lot of time building, repositioning VicHealth as an agency and rebuilding key relationships, making sure that we have the right partnerships, that we have the trust, and that we have the runs on the board, so that we're able to work closely with communities across the state in that more authentic and respectful way. Rethinking the way we work, and I'll talk about this in terms of our office, but also the time we spend actually, you know, listening versus talking. And I think most importantly, you know, kind of the last 10 years, we've all talked about complexity and systems, and they're very intellectual, interesting conversations. Now they're playing out in real time. I think we have to also think of equity in the same way, that we can't continue to put populations and individuals into silos, and we don't do that with risk factors. Risk factors work in an intersectional manner. It is the constellation of multiple risk factors, as it is within equities. It is the constellation of multiple barriers, life experiences, lived experiences, and it's the intersection of those. And we need to embrace that complexity and integrate that into our responses as we look to recovery. So some very practical things that we're doing across the pandemic as we look to recovery. So how do we be a more one of the things I was reflecting on as we were reimagining the way we work, we knew that, staff would continue to work from home. We wanted to reposition the agency as a partner. And we also wanted to make sure that, it was very clear to the community that we belong to Victorians and that our work belongs to Victorians. And so therefore, by extension, our office does too. So as we moved to a new space from Carlton into the city, we decided to flip the way we thought about how we work to be a more authentic partner. So instead of it being VicHealth's offices, and you can come and use a desk if you ask us, we launched our space as the Victorian Health Promotion Hub. It's available to all of our partners to use. It's on the doorstep to regional Victoria through the major regional transport hub, Southern Cross Station, and we use the space that we need to be able to get our work done. We've also transitioned over the last 18 months. We've completely redesigned and reimagined our social marketing team. So I inherited a social marketing team, a classic sort of communications team that ran great campaigns, but it was driven on a 20th century model. It was driven on paid media, TV, and really for a world that no longer existed. And so we have now moved to a model where we're digital first, where we have in-house production capability. We have a digital team, we have a podcast and studio in our new offices. So it's really about embracing new ways of communicating so that we can meet people where they're at, so that we can communicate in a more effective and real-time way with populations. And we're seeing the results. We're able to deliver our gender equality in sport campaign this year at less than half the cost, and yet reach record numbers of Victorian women, because we're using the technologies that they're using to communicate, and we're behaving more like a business than a government, than a public health agency would traditionally behave. The other major investment is a new investment in young people. So in a little over a month, we will launch the single biggest investment we've ever made in the health recovery and wellbeing of young people, 0 to 25, across 3 key public health areas that they have told us are the priority for them. It will launch, instead of launching with a whole predefined package of interventions designed by experts like myself, we will go out and stage our largest crowdsourcing campaign in the history of our organisation. We will ask thousands of young people through the employed engagement of 14 community champions, diverse young people of all different backgrounds and abilities and cultures from across Victoria, who have been recruited through a wide and open process. We will ask Victoria's young people to tell us, what does health mean to them? Because it doesn't mean the same thing to every young person, and they don't want to be compared to the young person next to them. They don't want to be in competition for health. And they may not be trying to achieve a certain BMI or a certain life expectancy. They have their own ideas of health. So what is that? How do we help them to achieve that? And what are the barriers that we need to work on so that they can achieve that sooner? So we'll work across 3 sort of classic public health imperative areas: food and food systems, social connection, and meaningful social connection, which is our investment, major new investment in mental health promotion of young people, and creating flexible environments for young people to be physically active. We will continue to be a major supporter of sport, but going well beyond sport, really looking at creative, flexible, respectful, inclusive ways for everyone to feel confident and comfortable to get active in a way that is meaningful for them. So this will be a $45 million 3-year investment in the recovery, health and wellbeing of young people. It will be designed by young people, and we've just signed partnerships with 8 of the major youth peaks across the state to really ensure that this is actually, designed and delivered by young people. We've also been developing new methodologies to make sure that young people even decide where our $10 million worth of grants go every year. So at the end of the day, I have to sign off on that $10 million spend, but young people are employed from across Victoria to decide on where the grants go for their own communities and for their own demographic. And so this is a sort of package that will lead off with Future Healthy, and that really kind of user-centered, digital-driven, crowdsourced design process that will help us to put the final colour on the major investments, what we call move the dial investments, which are about $10 million a year for the next 3 years. We continue to have a major investment in research, and so again, how is our research evolving in 2021? And I know I'm out of time, but we're moving to more implementation research. So it's more a question of how. We know what we need to achieve by 2030. The hard part is, how do you do it in the current political economy? How do you do it in the systems we live in? We're launching new translational fellowships. So it's a new fellowship program, 12 at any one time, fully funded postdocs working half in our organisation on policy and practice, whilst still having a research home and contributing to a pipeline of research excellence in public health for Victoria and the future. So we'll continue. We're launching our translational research fellowships. We'll continue to really question what the role of the expert, the traditional expert is, and how we integrate lived experience into our programs and insights. And of course, one of the major recent investments for us in trying to drive big conversations, in addition to the Lancet series that Selina mentioned, was an MJA supplement, really trying to get a national conversation linked to some work that we're doing around wellbeing economy. So what does it look like for Victoria to go beyond GDP, to really follow the New Zealand model and the Welsh model, to look at intergenerational measures and pathways for our economy? We have a political opportunity partly because of the pandemic and because where society and politics is at due to the pandemic. And so how do we continue to, drive the conversations to unify the public health sector and to set a pathway? And so our first step in that has been 2 pieces. One was a report that we've just launched with the George Institute on wellbeing economy and what it means for Australia. And the second was a supplement with 65 of the nation's experts, including many of you here, on Australia in 2030, what is our path to health for all? And we'll continue those pieces of work over the coming years. And finally, just to say, I think we need to, particularly this week, and the pandemic has once again reminded us, we live on one planet. I think it's very easy in Australia for us to sort of get our blinkers, and I think the strength of the collaborating centre model and the richness of how many centres of excellence like the ones that you run around Australia. I mean, we punch way above our weight as a nation with regards to the collaborating centres. And so how do we continue to invest in those global partnerships and to show that Australia and Victoria is an able and ready and committed partner to not just ensuring that we leave a better, healthier, more sustainable Victoria or Australia, but also globally. So we have reaffirmed our commitment to the Collaborating Centre. We're also just recently the first non-national government agency in the world to have a partnership directly with UNICEF at the global level, focused on child and adolescent health and wellbeing, and particularly around child obesity. So we continue to support our local institutions to contribute to on the global stage, but also to ensure that our work is informed by and then informs global best practice. So thank you very much again for time. I think we might have time for questions. I tend to get too passionate and speak way through my questions time, but over to you, Selina.
Thanks so much, Sandro. Fantastic presentation, and particularly appreciate your presentation on inequities and intergenerational equity. So I think we've got time for one question, but we can ask Sandro questions in the plenary after Susan's presentation also. So does anyone have a question to raise here? Piali, can you see any hand that I can't? No. Okay, well then I will thank you again, Sandro, so much, and look forward to your input in our next half an hour. And I'll move right along to Julian. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Selina. And that was just a wonderful talk, Sandro. I think the ability to combine philosophy, which is supported by facts, is not that well practiced these days, but you do it extremely well. And it's nice to look beyond the spin into what's really happening in society. Have you thought about making it OzHealth rather than just VicHealth? I think we need to expand beyond just Victoria. But I thought the message to take away is papering over the cracks of inequity. I really like that. So thank you very much. That was very inspirational. And now, talking about inspirational, it's my privilege now to introduce Susan Sawyer. And Susan is the co-chair of the network with me. And it's a real privilege to co-chair the network with Susan, who really is a world expert on the health and well-being of young people, which is so important these days, and as Sandro said, in so many aspects of what we do. So Susan's going to give a broad overview of the strategy, and then Susan and I and the executive of the network will encourage you to ask questions and have discussion. So please, Susan, it's up to you.
You're on mute, Susan.
Have I been unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted. We can hear you.
My apologies. You might think that 18 months later you'd get your act together around this issue. Let me just, can you see that? I can't see the screen sharing. Okay, are we right?
Yep, we're right.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Selina, and particular thanks to Sandro for those really inspiring words. And again, you know, to acknowledge that the importance of VicHealth. I love Julian's suggestion of OzHealth in terms of your own role as one of the 54 Australian collaborating centres. This is a particularly, I think, important time that the executive has been sort of taking this new network through, really just over the past 18 months or so since it was formed in mid-2019, but really only launched in late 2019 in December, with Martin Taylor in the middle there being the guest of honour at the two-day workshop that we held and that many of you joined us in Melbourne to really kickstart the initiative, which was indeed a very important initiative of the Australian Global Health Alliance. We set up very soon after that, at the start of 2020, a governance working group to really try and explore the orientation of the Australian network to the Alliance in particular, and then developed some terms of reference. The coordinator, Piali Samaya, was appointed in April 2020, and then the executive was established in June of last year. And I must say it was fascinating when I met Piali for the first time at the Australian Global Health Alliance strategic meeting in December. I suddenly realised this was the first time I'd actually met her face to face, and it's remarkable what can be achieved online. This is the executive committee, And I'd really like to acknowledge all of the members of the committee that come from not only Victoria, but also New South Wales with Julian, from Queensland with Maxine, and Sharon, who's the one whose photo's not here. And to also particularly acknowledge not just the efforts of Misha Coleman in terms of really the idea and the initiative and getting the funding from the Victorian State Government to get the network going, but also then particularly want to acknowledge the role of Mary Harney, who is the Acting Executive Director, who really has assisted with this strategic review, which is really the first time to aim to develop a strategy on a page that has been circulated to all of you, and I hope you've had an opportunity to read that. So that's us as our executive, but this is you as representing the 54 collaborating centres that come very broadly across the country. And with new ones developing all the time, there are 2 new ones that I know are about to come on board as well. Again, interestingly, both in Melbourne. And I think as Selina said, Australia, in terms of WHO collaborating centres, really does punch above its weight in terms of the proportion of collaborating centres for our population size. So led by Mary, we are all as the executive really delighted to have a workshop, mostly face-to-face, and that included this remarkable dinner beforehand. And Julian thought I was a bit naff by showing the photo, but I just sat here thinking this was, perhaps one of the, no, I won't say how few times I've been out to dinner this year, but it was one of the few times going out to dinner with a group of professional colleagues that was such a joy. And I think really then allowed us to go into our day of strategic planning, that you can see the yellow notes around the room and you can see Sharon and Maxine online. That was really a very productive time. We didn't just start de novo. This was in the context of what had been a strategic planning exercise that Mary had led the Australian Global Health Alliance through. So it was very much hand in glove with that. And it also built on the terms of reference that the initial group had put together in relationship to what was seen as really the primary purpose. But as you can see here, there are really a pretty large number of bullet points here. And so what we were really trying to do is to rationalise, simplify that a little bit. So where we got to in terms of this as a framework that we're going to be working within was 3 points about purpose, mission and vision. So the purpose being around the network of WHO collaborating centres seeking to exchange information, foster good practices and develop technical cooperation between each other, WHO and government. Notably not saying which government or governments. The mission, to mobilise the collective expertise of the Australian WHO collaborating centres. Very simple. And then the vision, to advance WHO's aspiration for sustainable health for all in Australia, our region and globally. So hopefully that's pretty clear and straightforward. We then put 3 strategic objectives together, and I won't read each of these, but these were really around the notion of raising profile and influence, sharing knowledge, and then connecting one to another and then beyond for leverage. And then under each of these strategic objectives, and this is where we get our strategy on a page, so this is the bottom 2/3 of the page. You can probably read in very small print, but perhaps on your own computers read better some of the major activities that we were, in a sense, highlighting as those kick-off sorts of activities that, as you know, we've been involved with really over the first 12 months of this executive sort of leadership. So that was really all I wanted to share of what the executive has been putting together, and I think now is the opportunity to really seek your thoughts, reflections, engagement around that. As I mentioned, from our perspective, this is the framework that feels like it makes sense, building on what we've previously put together in terms of the terms of reference that you've all had input into. And I think that opportunity now is to really think about how we get your thoughts, ideas around translating this into a set of concrete actions that obviously we'll now be wishing to develop as a more operating plan that we'll be aiming to review on an annual basis. So over to you, and perhaps to give the executive initially any opportunity for any thoughts. What have I missed here, guys? Is there anything else that that others of you in the exec who are online would like to add perhaps first? And then just to throw it open. And then in particular, I would be keen to get Selina's reflections on this as well, because as I mentioned, this is a very exciting time, not only with a new executive director, but also with a new chair of the board of the Australian Global Health Alliance, pulling of the board to council, with Brendan Crabb just having transitioned into the new role as well. So I think this is a very timely opportunity for the network.
So if I just take that opportunity, and thanks Susan for representing the exec's work so well. I think, you know, as we've been doing this, there's been some really great examples of some of these things we've been talking about. That non-communicable disease and ageing workshop was again bringing together of many of the collaborating centres, and some that you wouldn't naturally think would be interested in those sorts of issues. And I know that there's been a lot of activities spin out from that. So I think that real excitement about trying to see how we can think differently and out of the box. If you keep doing the same things, you get the same results. We can't afford to do that anymore. So I think we've already demonstrated that some of these things are achievable, are really worthwhile, and will help engage a lot of people more. Thanks.
Pip here. I just add, thank you, Susan. I think all of us on the executive do very strongly feel that we are representing and representative of the WHOCCs as a group. And, the whole purpose of the network is to use the narrow expertise that each of us have and join together so that we are actually more effective in implementation, both in Australia, but more specifically internationally. And so really, while we've worked on the strategy and we're talking to you about that today, really below that strategy, there needs to be a plan. And we're really looking for active input from across the network for ideas, ways that we can engage better, ways that we can communicate, ways that we can work together and become more effective. So we're really at that point and really pleased to be talking and launching it today as an invitation and a series of activities that we hope to have to continue that engagement.
Interesting, just as a quick back of the envelope exercise, the executive now has the opportunity to participate at the regular council meetings of the Australian Global Health Alliance. And so I joined for the first time last month and did this quick look at all of the collaborating centres just to try and get a sense of what they are. You've all seen the list of them, so you know them as well as I do. But about a third were, if you like, focused on neglected tropical diseases or, in infectious diseases one way or other. About a third were focused more on population groups or disciplines such as, midwifery or, in my own interest, adolescent health. And then about a third were focused on sort of different approaches to technologies, such as telehealth and things like this. So it was really quite interesting to get that span of expertise that is so widely represented by the group of us. Any other reflections, questions, uncertainties? George?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I just wanted to reflect. Obviously, this is a network of WHO collaborating centres, and we all believe in WHO as an organisation. However, I'm very aware that WHO as an organization has changed and evolved over the years. It's a diminished organization, arguably, compared to what it was. If you look at money, sort of UNICEF, I don't know what the budget of UNICEF is compared to WHO, but it's huge. Look at the World Bank, you look at some of these other big initiatives that really sit outside of WHO, Gavi, Global Fund. You know, this is where the money has increasingly been. And at the same time, WHO has responded by, I think, focusing very much on ministries of health in its work. And yet when I reflect on what Sandro was talking about, you know, we're talking about things which really lie the drivers of health lying in politics, structural processes, structural barriers, you know, really action around many of the major health problems we need to take is going to lie in sectors beyond where VicHealth is focused. So I just see a tension here. I just wondered if you as the executive have reflected on sort of how you might move forward with that. And is the network confined only to sort of a relationship with WHO, I guess, in that context?
Maxine? Thanks, George.
Yeah, thanks, George. I'm sure we've all felt those tensions. What I'm finding in my relationships with our responsible officers, as they're called, is that they actually look to the WHO collaborating centres to help them get that broader intersectoral, multisectoral reach. So that we're often an instrument to allow them to do that, which they may not be able to do within their own organisation. And then by doing that, we bring that knowledge and that expertise. We can engage them. You know, we have to, our terms of reference always say we're doing this to support WHO, etc. But we're not confined to then having to be with ministries of health only. And so when you talk to officers who see a real role for the collaborating centres, it's exactly that. We give them some of that flexibility that they can't normally do by having to go through their bureaucratic channels. That'd be my experience to date.
Thanks, Maxine. Michelle?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Maxine. I thought that was a really important point because certainly our work in PNG, WHO gave us almost what was regarded as seed funding for a massive project there. And through that seed funding, we were able to link with DFAT. And so now we've got DFAT, WHO and other partners on a very big project in PNG. And WHO just couldn't have been as agile. They didn't have the money to do this big piece of work around community health workers, nursing, health security, a whole variety of areas. So that linkage has enabled and our WHO colleagues are always saying, oh, Michelle, can you just do this for us? So I think that dynamic is a really important one that they use us for.
Julian, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to support actually what Michelle just said in that, you know, two things. I guess WHO really has, when you look at UNICEF and the World Bank and the other agencies, WHO has the traditional platform in health around the world and has a huge amount of credibility on a country-to-country basis. And certainly in WIPRO, WHO is restructuring and exactly as Michelle just said, rarely a week or two go by when we don't get a call saying, would you mind helping us with this or helping us with that? So I think unlike the other UN agencies, WHO over the last many decades has been able to mobilise and utilise this concept of collaborating centres. So I think that the collaborating centres are looking forward to a future, an increasingly important future. And that was reinforced by Takashi at the regional meeting recently. That's it.
So thanks all. I mean, you will have hopefully seen that there are some really good comments in the chat as well. And perhaps just responding to Ben Murray's question about the value of exploring with WHO, what they would value from such a network. We certainly have been doing that and can certainly attest to the perceived value that they are experiencing from the network. But my sense is that whilst and part of that value is bringing visibility to different sets of expertise. You know, they know many of you through the direct engagement that you would have, but you know, others of us might have a more direct engagement with Geneva or CERO rather than WIDPRO, and so the sense is often that that one hand doesn't know what the other is doing, and being able to be a singular point of call is, my sense, something that they, certainly in the WIDPRO office, are seriously appreciating from us. But I think that this is a point that we can, in a sense, dial up as time goes on. Matt, I'd be interested in giving you the floor in terms of just responding to your question about you know, recognising the new tools that are needed, and whether you'd like the opportunity to just share a little bit more, some thoughts on that.
Sure. So, you know, I come from a strong health promotion and public health background, and obviously health equity is a key platform in those discussions. But do we actually need to think about how this, I'll put it a seismic shift. I feel like the tectonic plates have really shifted from a public health perspective, or certainly global public health perspective. Do we need to think about creating new tools for ensuring health equity, not only globally, but you know, within countries? I mean, certainly COVID in Australia seems to be you know, impacting different communities at different points. So, and how do we best respond to that? You know, I really think it's time to think a bit differently now about what tools we have, and are they still fit for purpose?
How do you think we can best think that through? I'm interested in the sort of, in terms of this as a strategy on a page that we've been developing. Do you have any thoughts of linking this back to our strategy moving forward in terms of some of the actions that we could be thinking about?
I can't remember the exact points on the page, but certainly that there's a knowledge translation one from memory. Yeah. And you know, sometimes, you know, we're a bit too afraid sometimes, I think, in the health sector and government to kind of admit where things have gone a bit wrong. So are there examples where you know, we haven't done something right, or we could, you know, do differently? So perhaps instead of, often we do success case studies, are there actually failure case studies that we could do as collaborating centres of where things have not come quite right, and you know, either improvements to existing tools, or you know, setting out a whole new way, you're kind of leading the way, I guess. And I think you know, we've got enough brain power on this Zoom call for sure to kind of get to go, okay, well, that didn't go so well, what can we learn from that?
I had the honour of listening to an amazing presentation yesterday that was led by the International Women's Development Agency in relationship to engaging with women's leadership groups in the Pacific, and the you know, the risk of the tokenistic ways of colonial powers engaging with groups. And it was the most beautiful reflection I felt about you know, learning from failure in that sense. So I do take your point, Matt, about the importance of that. Certainly, you know, we would be very, you know, you've seen some of the specific activities that that we've been engaged in terms of getting the network going. We've identified priority areas that have been previously shared, but I think in terms of moving to some of those more operational steps, you know, this is where it's absolutely the ideas from the WHO collaborating centres are ones that we would welcome. It's been interesting to watch the engagement in the e-zine that Piali has you know, done a terrific job of pulling together as an opportunity to be cross-fertilising perhaps, and sharing where expertise sits, and And this is, I think, an opportunity that we're really trying to encourage you to join out, one to another as well. But I'm seeing the opportunity here from some of these comments that are being made in the chat of that I think would be perhaps valuable for the executive to be taking on board. Selina, I'm just aware of time.
Yes.
And I just wondered whether this is an opportunity to ask you to come in to just share a little bit your thoughts in terms of the directions of the Australian Global Health Alliance as well, and the citing of the Australian network of collaborating centres within that, in a sense, the governance question that came up. And
certainly. Thank you so much. I'm very mindful of everyone's time too, so I'll try to be quick, but I will also try to address both Ben and hi Ben, and I think it was Ken's question as well. How is the Australian network of collaborating centres related to the Australian Global Health Alliance? So we are at the Alliance involved also, set off, thanks to Mary, also in finalisation of our draft strategy, and happy to share that with you in some stage in the next months. I'm tasked in my second month with pulling together some of our operating principles and ideas. And I can share with you that we also have a specific set of themes that our very broad and diverse membership spoke about and committed to at our strategy meeting. And the task right now is to put that into implementation and operating strategy that works both for the growth of the Alliance, as only a 4-year-old alliance, let's be honest, that is mainly Melbourne focused and wanting to grow it nationally and having that opportunity to do that, but also to address some of these really big and complex themes that are not solely addressed by the health sector, such as gender and climate change, that the membership want to commit to. And so the way, I'm very new, but I actually prefer to see all of this as opportunity rather than problem or challenge. And I really emphasize opportunity both for the network and for the Alliance and for us as partners, because right now the world and Australia needs you. I know that sounds really blithe, but we need to have safe operating spaces, secure, strong global health voices, but platforms for experts to be able to be heard and their messages to be disseminated. And using all those complex but also obvious technologies that Sandro so beautifully illustrated that he's implementing at VicHealth, we also have to be nimble enough to shift also with the challenges that we're facing. And so the next period forward, I would hope that as the Alliance, what I'm looking at is discussing 3 broad growth areas, which I will share now. As obviously it's growing this secure, strong platform of members, and I hope that can grow further and include other partners that are not necessarily traditional health partners, but can also be perhaps safe financing partners in the future. But also looking secondly at our impact. And by impact, there is the impact that we as a global health community have in terms of the world at large, and bringing global health lessons like from journals or studies or our colleagues and networks overseas, such as WHO, to Australian or domestic audiences to address the global health challenges that we see on the ground here, as Sandro so beautifully illustrated, I thought also. But also speaking from the global health perspective, as in me previously being in London or Beijing, this whole region is so poorly represented in global health literature, and also I think in terms of big financing partners. I mean, we don't have a Gates Foundation, or we don't have these Unitaid innovative financing mechanisms. We've not where are they and where will they be? Where will the emerging economies of our region, of ASEAN, be in the future? That's some area to look at too. But also the just the Indigenous wisdom, the knowledges that needs to be translated and shared in a more wider role. And I think as the Australian Global Health Partnership, we're really committed to learning more and also seeing what kind of opportunities arise in the next little while. And then thirdly, in terms of the growth area that I would envisage, it is partnerships, and however you want to define that, but there's some pretty low hanging fruit I think that we can pick on now. It's social and arts, it's the business and corporate sector, but safely, and that is where some of the work that Lancet and VicHealth have partnered together to work on to see how we can share this with the global health community and possibly transform, you know, the way that we're engaging on these enterprises. And also in terms of our government relations. So I've had really good feedback from Canberra in terms of the alliance and the work that it's been doing there. So they're all services that are there for our partners to engage in. And as far as the network goes, I mean, from where I sit, even though WHO has been battled through this pandemic, sometimes quite unfairly so and sometimes fairly so, it is still a really strong brand, and it is the only multilateral health brand we have globally. So we have to protect it and we have to make it stronger. And I see the wonderful expertise of the Australian collaborating centres as this opportunity, perhaps to show as a case or a network study and how it can be done. So I see this as an opportunity, and I'll stop there. It's not for me to define, you know, the network way, but here to offer an ear, but also as a partner to help you grow also in this journey. And I better stop here before Piali ticks me on the back for overgoing on the time. But thank you. Am I the person to end this session? I think I am indeed.
I think you are. I was just going to say, are you happy to close?
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining on this session. As I haven't had the opportunity to meet each of you individually, but I'm here